Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're taking a look at the FN M249S. That is specifically the semi-auto civilian version of the US Army and Marine Corps' M249 SAW. Now, there's a lot of background to the M249, to the FN Minimi. This is technically a subvariant of the FN Minimi. The Minimi was developed in 1974 following FN's tremendous success with the FN MAG, 7.62 caliber machine gun. It was tested by the US Army in 1978. It was adopted in 1982, eventually by both the Army and the US Marine Corps, given the designation of M249, and called the SAW, the Squad Automatic Weapon. Now, we'll delve into the development and the origins of the FN Minimi and how it became the SAW in a separate video. Today, I want to dedicate specifically to the semi-auto civilian version that we have here. This is one of the 3 guns in FN's military collector series, and that series came about because FN started getting contracts to supply small arms to the US military. Now, that meant they had to be manufactured in the United States, so FN has a manufacturing plant in Columbia, South Carolina, where these are made. The first gun that FN got contracts for was, of course, this, the M240, well, the full auto version of this, the M249 SAW, starting in the 1980s. But not content with that, FN started competing for the US Army rifle contracts. That would be the M16, originally the M16A2. FN won its first M16 contract in 1988, taking part of that away from Colt, who had been the previous contractor. They kept making M16A2s. Colt managed to stay in the game by developing the M4 carbine, but FN snagged a partial M4 carbine contract in 2013 and hasn't looked back since, eventually taking over all of the M4 contract production for the US military, as Colt has kind of gone downhill for a long time, until they were recently bought by CZ. We'll see where that goes, but that's a sidetrack here. What happens is, by 2013, FN is making M16s, M4 carbines, and M249 SAWs for the US military. FN looks at this situation and they're thinking, like, what can we do with this plant in the US? Well, it's making guns that are 100% US made, as required by the military contract, and that means that they're not susceptible to any of the various importation laws. So the laws that would prevent FN in Belgium from importing military-style rifles to the US, none of those apply because these things are being made entirely in the US. So they could actually take their exact military rifle, just convert it from semi-auto to full auto, make it as a factory new semi-auto, and sell it to the commercial market. And that's essentially what they did, starting in 2015. So 2 years after they snagged their first contract for the M4, they come up with a military collectors program, where essentially what they're going to do is make as close to an exact copy of their military production rifles and release them to the public as semi-autos for collectors, for people who want to have their own example of a US military small arm. This would apply to 3 specific guns: the M4 carbine, the M16 rifle, and the M249 SAW. This is by far the coolest of them. So, by the way, I got a lot of the information about the backstory on this from a guy named Mark Hainish, who was, in fact, in charge of running the team that created this military collectors program, and he ran it for about 2 years before moving on from FN to other work. But so we really do have sort of the inside scoop here on what was going on. And the cool thing about Hainish is he really does appreciate the collector's mindset, the collector's interest, and the civilian shooter interest. And so he really pushed FN to make these guns as close as they possibly could to the actual military production stuff. Instead of making roll marks different, just leave them exactly the same as they're done on the military guns. The selector markings, for example, on the M16 and the M4 have a full auto marking on them. The selector doesn't go to full auto, but there's, I mean, as he put it to me, we could mark this thermonuclear bomb. That doesn't actually make it a thermonuclear bomb. There's nothing that says we can't mark a full auto selector setting on there. It just only has a semi-auto position on the switch. So anyway, the biggest hurdle, it's one thing to make semi-auto versions of what are essentially AR pattern rifles, but what was really cool that FN did was also apply this collector's program to the 249 SAW. And it turns out it wasn't actually that hard to rebuild the internals of this to make it semi-auto only. And aside from that, the thing is completely parts interchangeable with an actual M249 SAW. So let's take a closer look inside it and I'll show you how it works. All right, we are going to start with a basic overview of how the 249 works, markings, etc., and then we'll take it apart and I'll show you what they changed to make it into a semi-auto version, noting that the original standard military 249 is an open bolt firing gun and it's full auto only. It doesn't have a semi-auto selector setting. So in addition to changing it to semi-auto, they also had to change it to run from a closed bolt configuration to fit with basically ATF policy. One cool element to mention here is that aside from the internal changes to the fire control parts, the rest of the gun uses exactly the same parts that the military ones do. And what that means is that large accessories like barrels and buttstocks are completely interchangeable with other models of military ones. So if you want to put the short 249 para barrel on here, you can. It'll drop right on. Be aware the military para barrel is actually shorter than 16 inches, and so that's an NFA item. If you just drop it on there, the semi-auto version of the para has a just slight, well, I can't remember if it's a longer barrel or if they just pin on, permanently attach the flash hider to make the whole thing 16 inches, but something to be aware of there. But all of the other accessories, things like, well, for one, tripod mounts, vehicle mounts, any sort of railed accessories, and anything that they do in the future to update or improve the guns, well, all of those parts will fit, do fit, and will fit directly onto the 249S. So that's a really cool thing that FN has done with this, especially when you compare it to some other, well, the best example would be Colt, deliberately making their early AR-15 lowers incompatible with standard uppers. Anyway, markings to start with, we have 556 M249S semi-auto serial number. Note that this is the standard prefix here, 249 semi-automatic. This is number 10,410. They have in fact made 10,400, probably 10,500 by now, of these guns. That's a lot of expensive semi-auto FN 249s. Anyway, made in FN, Columbia, South Carolina, so all US made. A few of the other parts have some various other manufacturing codes on them. Got one there on the magazine cover, one there on the top cover, one right there on the bottom of the receiver. You'll note that this implies that this started off as a standard receiver pressing before it was completed as a semi-auto only gun. Anyway, the fire control system is quite simple. There is just one cross bolt safety. So if you can see red, it's ready to fire. Push that across to this side where there is no red. That's the safe position. And that's it. In fire, pull trigger, it fires if it's loaded. We do have storage in the grip, pistol grip. For what it's worth, if you're looking at this and you're thinking, boy, that grip sure looks real familiar. Didn't I see that on a FAL? Well, that's because DSA actually copied the Minimi grip for the FN FAL, their civilian manufactured versions of the FAL. We have a nice aperture rear sight here. This is adjustable for windage here and has a BDC cam in it right here. So I can rotate that up. You can see it was at the 300 position, 300 meters. And this will rotate all the way up to 1,000. The front sight is this fully hooded front post that adjusts, frankly, just like an AK or SKS sight. Put a tool in from the top, and you can screw that in or out to adjust your elevation. And you can also move the entire front sight tower on this dovetail that it is mounted to, which is relevant if you're trying to zero multiple barrels to the same gun, since the rear sight is fixed on the gun and the barrels are interchangeable. We do have a carry handle here. When it's in the downward position, you can just lift it up and it will lock itself in the upward position, offset. So if you do have to shoot it with the carry handle upward, it doesn't block your sights. In order to fold the carry handle down, you push it backwards to disengage that little lug, and it folds down. The charging handle is non-reciprocating. You'll see how that works in just a moment. The 249 has two separate methods of feeding. The primary one is belted ammunition, or ammunition on disintegrating links. So this uses the M27 link. That's this little guy. And so each cartridge holds two links together. When the cartridge comes out into the gun, the link is now separated from the belt and falls free out the far side of the gun. And that ammunition is held in these plastic 200 round capacity boxes. We've got some plastic tabs in here that just provide enough tension to keep the ammo from falling into the belt, but with a little bit of pressure, you can pull the belt out to feed. We have this dovetail bracket right here and locking tab, which insert onto this bracket on the bottom of the gun. So that slides in there until it clicks. And then to remove the box, you press down on the tab and pull it off. By the way, you don't have to have the box. It's just a very convenient way to hold and protect the belted ammo, keep it clean, etc. Notably, the Minimi, the 249, also can feed from standard AR magazines. Now, it's kind of infamous for not doing this reliably. We'll see how the semi-auto version is when we eventually take this out to the range. But what we have here is a magazine feed tower, basically, with a combination of dust cover and magazine catch. So when I put a magazine in here, this is going to lift up, and that little box right there locks into the magazine catch, like so. So there's my magazine. That presents cartridges in the same position as the belt. Obviously, you cannot use the belt and the magazine at the same time. The belt is generally much preferred. To remove the mag, just pull this tab down a little bit and slide the magazine out. All right, last feature I think is the bipod. Squeeze the legs together, the bipod deploys out, and it locks open like so. We have a little bit of rotation, pivot in the bipod, a little bit of play in all directions. You can also push this button in and extend, push it all the way in, there we go, extend the bipod leg out quite a lot if you need to. And the bipod will also lock in the forward position if you want to use that to rest it on a barricade or something. All right, let's start with disassembly. Now, the Minimi uses a rotating bolt, and much like an AR, the bolt locks into a trunnion that's built into the back end of the barrel. This is really good because it means you don't really have any pressure on the receiver itself, and so the receiver can be made out of a pretty simple, basic, and light stamped sheet metal instead of needing a big chunky milled receiver like the FN mag. Normally, on a machine gun version, an open bolt gun, this isn't really an issue for barrel changing. What you do is open the bolt first, lock it open so that the bolt is not connected, is not locked into the barrel, and then you can pull the barrel off. Well, this is a semi-auto closed bolt interpretation of the Minimi, which means that there is no way to lock the bolt back. I can lock the hammer back, but not the bolt itself. So FN provides the gun with this yellow, essentially, chamber flag. And what you do to remove the barrel, either you take all the bolt components out first, which is a hassle, or you open the bolt, push that in, that physically holds the bolt back, and then you can remove the barrel. And actually removing the barrel is very simple. You're going to use the handle because presumably it's hot. That's why you're removing it. All you have to do is pull this lever down and the barrel will slide right out the front of the gun. So there's your trunnion and locking surfaces back there. All right, we're almost there. A couple more things to show you on the barrel here. We have an upper handguard that's just held in place by a couple of spring clips. So I can just pop that off. And it's then locked onto this front pin right there. Handguard comes off. It's got a little metal heat shield inside it. And then we have our gas block assembly here, non-adjustable. You get one port size, and that's it. And now I can pull the bolt back and pull out this block. Now, for a basic field stripping of the gun, we can pull this top pin out. It is a retained pin. So I pull that out. It's going to let the buttstock pivot down far enough for me to remove the internal components. Actually, first, just to show you, I will lift the top cover. So to unlock the top cover, you have these two buttons. Squeeze them both in, you can lift the top cover up and it will lock itself in the upward position. From here, in order to drop it down, you actually have to pull this lever to let it down, like so. It will also hold itself at the 45-degree position. So this is nice. If you look at a lot of older belt-fed machine guns, they have top covers that in early models will tend to not hold themselves up, collapse down, and crush your fingers while you're trying to load or clear a malfunction. So this is a very nice setup. The feed system, by the way, is straight off the FN mag, which is basically straight off the German MG34 and MG42 designs. It's a quite good system. As this pawl on the bolt travels back and forth, it slides in this track, which is going to force this piece to rotate side to side, which in turn uses these two feed pawls to pull the belt inward. This works by pulling the belt halfway in on the rearward stroke of the bolt and the other half of the way in on the return forward stroke of the bolt. All right, but now that we have the buttstock open, we're going to take this. This is the spring retainer. I'm going to push it forward and lift it up. That allows the spring to come out. This is a fairly long spring, and as part of the semi-auto design, it's actually two springs. So what they essentially did was cut the back end off of the bolt carrier and turn it into a linear hammer. Let me go ahead and pull this all out. There's the linear hammer, and there is the bolt carrier. So first off, this is a long stroke gas piston operated gun, which means the gas piston is attached to the bolt and travels the full cycle of the bolt. Now inside the bolt carrier here, we have a bolt, really kind of AR-AK-ish. It's a rotating bolt, two major locking lugs. That's the cam lug that forces it to rotate. This is our firing pin, which has its own spring. So when that's compressed, firing pin pokes out the front. And we can actually take that out by pushing out this pin, but I'm going to wait to do that because first, let me show you how this normally works. In the open bolt version, the bolt is traveling in this position, and when this hits the barrel face, it's going to push back. This cam lug forces it to rotate, which locks the lugs into the barrel, and then it travels straight back right here, and it's going to hit a tower built into the back end of the bolt carrier, which forces the firing pin forward. This is done from an open bolt, which means that it starts in this position, and when you pull the trigger, the sear drops, which releases the whole thing to go forward, chamber the round, and as soon as the bolt slams all the way back, locked in position, it fires, and then the gas piston cycles open and it repeats the process. In order to convert this to semi-auto, what they've done is essentially cut the two elements apart so that we have the locking system, which now is powered by its own, well, it's powered by the same spring. It's this small diameter spring. So when you charge the thing, this part is going to go all the way forward and put a round into battery, lock the bolt, ready to fire. But this half, the actual hammer, is going to be held back by the sear, which means they're able to use the exact same firing system from the full auto 249. Instead of holding the entire bolt assembly backward, it's just holding back this part, which is acting like a hammer. So when you pull the trigger, the sear drops off of this surface, this comes flying forward, and it does that same job, hitting. So as that goes forward, firing pin protrudes, and the gun fires, and then the whole thing reciprocates, and the hammer gets locked back in the ready-to-fire position again. We have this bit spring-loaded as a disconnector, so when this goes forward, there are two curved paths, ramps, right there, that force this disconnector down like so, and then it won't reset until the bolt has cycled. So essentially this right there is your semi-auto disconnector. What's really elegant about this is it means they didn't have to change the firing mechanism, like the trigger mechanism. They just had to convert essentially the bolt carrier from one piece into two, which is pretty clever. Now, in order to make that work, they also added two rails there and there to the bottom of the receiver. Those are not in a standard 249, and they're what this hammer actually runs on. So the bolt is running on these top rails, and the hammer is running on those bottom rails. By the way, I told you I'd show you how the charging handle actually works. It's really simple. It's just a tab here that hits the back end of the bolt carrier and just shoves it backward. So very simple handle there. All right, let's do a little more disassembly here. If we push out the bottom pin on the buttstock, it's also captive and allows us to remove the whole stock assembly. Note that there is a little buffer in there. And with the buttstock off, the pistol grip assembly just comes right off, and now you can see that very simple firing sear. So it does have a disconnector in here as well. The full auto ones obviously wouldn't, but all we have there essentially is pull trigger sear drops. We do have a number of dust covers here. So we have an ejection port cover that is automatically knocked open when the bolt goes forward. That makes a little more sense on the full auto version where the bolt can be locked open, ready to fire, and you can close this. On the semi-autos, when the bolt's always in the forward position when it's ready to fire, this doesn't do quite the same thing as effectively, but we also have a spring-loaded dust cover here for the charging handle. The little bit that protrudes inside has to have a place to go. So that's very similar to like the FN FNC, which has a sort of a two-position bouncing dust cover there. So normally this will eject empty links right here and empty shell cases down there. A few more little bits. We can pop out this cross pin. Normally you would do that with a cartridge. Also retained, all the pins on this are retained. That allows us to pull off the handguard, which requires getting the bipod out of the way. There we go. We can pull off the front handguard. We can then come up here and take out the gas tube by rotating this, and then it just slides out. It's retained by a little spring right there that snaps into this detent in the gas tube. And with the gas tube out, I can just lift off the bipod. And I'm going to leave the top cover on, but you can pretty well see here what we're left with is this sheet metal chassis that all the bits bolt onto. Actually, kind of looks reminiscent to the Stoner if you think about it. Now, that is a field-stripped FN 249S semi-auto. I think there's a really interesting like social mindset aspect to this story as well, because there was a fair amount of back and forth between the FN USA team making this military collector series and the overall parent company administration of FN in Belgium over specifically and especially the M249S. The Belgian administrators just truly didn't understand why anyone would want this. They didn't see any reason that this would be a successful product. Like, it's $7,000 at the time. It's really expensive. And like, why would a civilian want such a thing? It's not a sporting rifle in any, like, it didn't click for them why this would be an interesting item. Well, from the American collector perspective, of course, it's a fantastically interesting item. The collectors, small arms collecting worldwide, but there's more of it in the US than there is anywhere else, is like always focused on having the exact thing or the closest you can get to it, to the small arms that have made military history over the years. And it doesn't make a whole lot of difference whether that's 300 years ago or 800 years ago or last year. It is having the specific firearms that were involved in major events. That's what makes them really interesting, I think, to a lot of collectors. And this absolutely fits the bill. The 249 has been a major part of every US military operation from the 1990s to the present day. I mean, from mid-1980s, but most of them actually took place in the 90s and beyond. All the Gulf Wars, like everything the US has done in the Middle East in recent memory has involved M249 SAWs. And so Hainish knew that this was going to be a popular product, and he kept pushing for larger planned production. The Belgians kept being skeptical and like tamping down the production expectations. You know, we're only gonna make fewer and try and limit our exposure on this. Lo and behold, they release, like the first press releases come out around spring of 2015 in time for the NRA annual meeting in 2015. announcing the entire military collectors program, the M4, the M16, and the 249 semi-autos. The other two were cool, but obviously the 249 stole the show, and they got kind of essentially deluged by interest and pre-orders. And by the time they formally released the gun at SHOT Show in 2016, they had thousands of orders in. By the end of 2016, they were manufacturing 500 a month and still thousands of orders behind. And this is, again, for a $7,000 gun. It's really expensive. And in a way, the Belgians are right. It's not hugely practical for anything specific. Like, this is not an IPSC competition rifle. This is not an NRA high power competition rifle. This isn't really well set up for any particular formal competition. It's just awesome. And so in the US shooting and collecting community, it's just awesome is enough of a, that's enough of a selling point to make a gun pretty darn successful. And this is a perfect example thereof. So anyway, they're still producing them today. They've been in constant production ever since. As you saw from our close-up view, they're over 10,000 produced now, which has got to be in pretty close competition to some pretty major military orders for full auto 249s. I think if you took the whole civilian sales of the 249S and lumped them together and considered them a single contract, I don't know exactly what numbers all different countries have ordered of Minimis, but I'm sure the US military is substantially higher than that. But I bet the US civilian sales of the 249S are greater than most countries' military procurement worldwide. So that certainly says something about the collector interest in these guns. Anyway, this is the standard version. They do also, today they're offering them in Coyote Tan, as well as the 249 paratrooper version in semi-auto with the shorter barrel and the collapsing stock. And of course, as I said, all the parts completely interchange. So all the modifications, all the upgrade kits, rails, all that sort of stuff, everything just drops right onto the 249S, which is super cool for, again, the collector who wants to duplicate a specific build out or time period of use of a gun that's been in US military service for 40 years now. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. We're going to have a follow-up to this where I take it out to the range and do some shooting with it, which I'm excited about. To be honest, when I first got this in here to film, I was like, you know, semi-auto machine gun. And then handling it, it just truly is a super cool gun. So I'm excited to see how it handles on the range. Stick around. We'll have that video next week. Thanks for watching.